James here, you're there, and on the other side of this theme song, Alan and I pluck more unseen movies from our shelves for this Cinema Shelfie episode of the Cinema Shame podcast, sponsored by open bracket, insert sponsor here, close bracket. Enjoy the show. Alan had the fortunate role of a Blu-ray of the O variety.
Oh. And I definitely got screwed.
This is where you're supposed to do the O. I guess it doesn't work that way. So the O are they? O is it? It doesn't really work. But just note that we tried.
I could have gotten the oh yeah.
There's lots of we put some yellow in here. You know, if I didn't have to pay so much for yellow.
Things go well, I might be showing her my O face. Oh. You know what I'm talking about. Oh.
So, yeah, I had to search high and low throughout my collection to find a Blu-ray starting with O that I hadn't seen before.
I would like to be known that I'm very disappointed because if he didn't have one, I got to pick it.
Yeah.
From something I had. And I had some great O choices.
I actually, part of me thinks I should have lied to you and said I couldn't find one. Because what I ended up finding was I went through my Severin collection, and in the House of Psychotic Women box set, there is the Other Side of the Underneath, or its alternate title, The Other Side of Underneath. Apparently, it was sold both ways.
It's a very important distinction.
Yeah.
Nine. Not right. Right, little girl. Not right. Either you want a magic act, or you don't.
And it's a movie that is historically important because it is the only British film from the 1970s solely credited to a female director. And so, of course, that makes it very important, and it deserves its own Blu-ray release, and it absolutely should be seen, and I hated every second of it. The problem is that it is an experimental movie based on a theatrical performance art piece, and that alone, if you've listened to this show before, you know that alone is enough to have me run screaming in the opposite direction. So I last night when I put this on, I knew I wasn't going to have a good time, and I didn't. But there is a lot, that good that can be said about it. It does have some very arresting imagery. It has some moments that are serve as really cool time capsules of the era. But unfortunately, a bunch of people literally having LSD trips and having it filmed and having it being shown as something profound when it really, really isn't. Apparently was inspired by a movement of the time that was very much anti-psychiatry. So the sort of framing, if you want to call it that, is that it shows a bunch of women who appear to be in some kind of asylum, and we're never told what is wrong. Well, we're never told anything. This is not a narrative film where there is a through line or a plot or actual characters you follow. It's just a series of vignettes featuring the same actors. And they're all very surrealistic. Some are arresting, some are just, let's get this over with as quickly as possible. The one moment where they really hit their theme there's a moment where I believe it's the director, I'm not sure, but I think her name is Jane Arden. And there's a scene, it's one of the only sort of relaxed and tranquil moments in the thing where it's a bunch of the people around a pool at the asylum. And in voiceover, you hear her talking about how the asylum has 3 different psychiatrists. and they all treat schizophrenia differently, and they all have different theories. And so basically your treatment you get as a patient will essentially depend on who you get assigned to as your doctor. And so she's basically talking about how it's all random, it's all meaningless, there's no such thing as real like treatment, like, and this idea of like, are you even mentally ill in the first place? It could be just a case where you've been assigned to someone who doesn't understand you and your situation. At least that's what I got out of it, and that's really the only moment that really had any coherence for me. If your friends have ever invited you to like a performance art theater piece, you know exactly what this is. You've gone through it before, and honestly, I don't mind it so much when it actually is theatrical, because then when it's performance art, it's about the live performance. So even if it's not necessarily like the best theater, at least you get the sense that the actor is going through a very real experience performing it in front of you, and it's a shared experience that you're having together with the audience. And I feel that gets lost in a cinematic experience. That is why as a rule I genuinely don't like filmed performance art. I feel like it's something you have to experience live. Actors love it because they get to feel all the feelings and show all the emotions without any of that remembering lines or, having a consistent character. All of the tough stuff would come with acting. It's all the fun bits without any of the hard bits. And I think that's one reason why I tend to be a bit cynical about it, because I just know that I'm getting the sense the performers are loving this. Although I guess in this sense, in case of this movie, it sounds like it was a pretty troubled production. So it's one of those ones where you want to go, well, they had fun making it, but then it turns out no one had fun making it either. So it was a miserable experience for the audience and a miserable experience for the actors. On the Blu-ray, there's a really long interview with one of the actors, a woman named Penny Slinger, who apparently is a well-known artist in the surrealist movement. I never heard of her before, but she had like this 2-hour interview on the disc, and I just fast forwarded to the part where she talks about this movie, and she mentions how there was a moment where she said no to the director because the director wanted her to be on stilts on top of a scaffolding. And she was like, well, I already had a fear of heights, but also no, I'm not doing that. One of the most arresting images is one at the end where they have this woman on a cross and she's naked and they're carrying her up this hill that's made of like small pebbles, and then they sort of like lift her up. And I'm like, the imagery is completely lost on me because all I'm thinking is these people are high, and this cross wasn't built to be held up like that, and it's on a mound of pebbles, and she's tied to a cross completely naked, and if this thing tips over, she's dead. Like, she's literally dead. She has no way to protect herself. She's just going to slam face first, like, body first, like, without any protection onto this, like, pile of pebbles. Of all of the things that were supposed to disturb me in this movie, that was the thing that actually disturbed me the most, because it was like, they were really doing it, and they were clearly doing it the worst way possible, and I didn't hear anything about her actually dying doing that, so apparently it worked out okay, but it was very touch and go there. Probably the most interesting sequence is one that makes no, like, of all the stuff that makes no sense, this one makes the least amount of sense. Is there's a very long sequence set in a Welsh Romani, like, sort of encampment, and Arden basically just films them having, like, a party, and you see some singing and some dancing and some fighting, and to me, like, the sort of the most, like, interesting about it is that there's a woman who's clearly a part of the village, and she's clearly disabled, mentally disabled, and there are a couple of times where things aren't going her way, and she lets out these cries of anguish that are so real and painful, and they hurt when you hear them. And it's like, to me, it was like a mistake to put those in, because when we've seen all of the other actors doing the same thing, it's so clearly fake when they're doing it. It's so clearly acting when they're doing it. Whereas you have this person who is like genuinely has a mental affliction and is sort of like crying and screaming. And it's like, oh my God, that's what it really looks like. And that's, that is reality compared to, well, and this is the other thing that sort of like struck me as sort of like dated about it, is that there's a lot of nudity in it. Like a lot of the women in it are naked. But for something that was created as part of a feminist collective, they're all conventionally attractive women, and they're all like, they're complete, like they've got shaved armpits, shaved legs. And so like my idea of radical feminism of that period is very different from what they're actually showing us, where it's basically like, if you actually, you know, gave this a narrative, it's essentially a Hammer movie in terms of like the women. Like it's like they're no, like the women are all conventionally attractive in that way. That seemed really off to me. But beyond that, yeah, I don't have a lot to say about this, you know, beyond me talking about it for 10 minutes. But for me, there was really no there. I think if you have a really strong appreciation for performance art, and you really like, say, like Jodorowsky, like if that's your thing, this may be something you'd be interested in. But yeah, it was pretty much lost on me.
Like most of Arden's films are kind of hard to find. I said that until a 2009 showing at the National Film Theatre and the Cube in Bristol, it had not been publicly shown anywhere since 1983 as a tribute to Arden, who committed suicide at the end of '82.
Yeah.
And then BFI did a remastered DVD and Blu-ray in 2009, and then we got it on this set.
Well, that was
from Severin.
The funny anecdote about this is that when we were talking beforehand about what movies we were going to talk about for Cinema Shelfies, I sent you the IMDb link to this movie, and your response is like, "Where do you dig this stuff up?" And I told you where I got it from, and you had it. You have it.
I have it. Yeah. I'd watched the first couple of movies on that set, and
yeah. I bought it for Identikit and the driver's seat, which I love. Like, if you guys want to see a really great like 70s pseudo giallo Elizabeth Taylor movie, watch The Driver's Seat. It's probably my favorite Taylor performance.
Yep. When I was reading about it, and I was like on the fence about it, and then somebody mentioned that it was basically Elizabeth Taylor in a giallo. I was like, well, I just buy it right now.
Yeah.
I don't need to talk about this anymore. Like, that's it. So yeah, I watched those, and then I kind of put it on the shelf, and then whatever's below that, I don't know.
Well, I think this series exists because I think we all, like, if you're a collector, and especially if you collect like sets, chances are there's always going to be one movie in that set that you know you're never going to watch unless someone forces you to. Like, you bought it for one movie, but then yeah,
it's like the chef's bite.
Yeah.
It's just the one you just leave there because you don't need to finish it really.
Yeah,
it's just right there. This is how much I appreciate it. I'm not going to finish it. All right. Well, not to whiplash this podcast entirely.
We are going to talk about a movie with a lot of naked ladies in it, though, so that's thematically consistent.
It's totally the same thing. We're going to keep it thematic. I rolled the letter T and Blu-ray, which meant that I had a lot to choose from. So I went and stared at my shelf and a bunch of my sets and decided I went with the one that felt most shameful rather than digging deep down that shelf to find some oddities. So I watched for the first time Blake Edwards' 10.
George Webber is a successful songwriter.
Elevator music. I'm very big in elevators.
And everything is going his way. With friends who respect him. And a woman who loves him. He couldn't ask for more. But George is about to discover that even a man who has everything doesn't have everything.
She was the most beautiful girl I had ever seen.
There's nothing more exciting than a fantasy. It can give life a new meaning. And most of all, it can make a grown man act like a child.
I would call it a complicated relationship with Blake Edwards. I can love and dislike a movie all at the same time. And I've been kind of going back and filling in the Blake Edwards gaps for things that I hadn't seen. And I'm not sure why 10 slipped through until now. I've owned the Blu-ray for pretty much as long as I can remember having Blu-rays. But I've been going back after watching SOB for the first time. I'm like, what else have I been missing out on? And SOB is another movie that I can love and question at the same time. There's so much to like about SOB. And then Blake Edwards does Blake Edwards things throughout, and he just can't help himself sometimes. And it works better in SOB than some of his other films. And you can go back to even something like The Pink Panther, which has a tone, and then he's got Inspector Clouseau. Inspector Clouseau just happens to be the best part about the movie, so he gets away with it in The Pink Panther. But The Pink Panther's kind of a mess.
Yeah.
And he was such a success that we spun it into a few more Pink Panther movies and perfects that character in Shot in the Dark, and then it's mixed bag after that. But that's kind of Blake Edwards' thing. He can't let me love a movie without exceptions. Like, there's always something, I love this movie except.
Well, I think that's why I was so surprised when, for one of our cinema shames, I did Victor Victoria. Because to me,
that's the exception.
It felt like the least Blake Edwards movie I had seen by Blake Edwards. It had none of the stuff I was dreading, and only the good bits. And although having said that, I decided I would watch 10 along with you because I had never seen it either, and it struck me like after I was over, I think that was the most Blake Edwards movie I'd ever seen, because I feel like there are many different sides of Blake Edwards. And I think 10 is the one where he most successfully puts them all together into one package.
It's funny you mention that, because as I was watching it, I kind of felt like there was a parallel between Blake Edwards and Bob Fosse in some ways, in the way that they approached their particular art.
Yeah.
In terms of filmmaking, at least. We talked about Bob Fosse. Did we talk about Bob Fosse in the episode? We must have.
Not directly, but when I talked about 8.5, I talked about how All That Jazz is essentially a remake.
I feel like Blake Edwards is kind of tapping into some of that same energy here in 10. And you can tell there's a lot of Blake Edwards writing Blake Edwards into Blake Edwards. And in 10, he's clearly projecting his midlife crisis onto this main character. It feels real. It feels sloppy. It feels like something Bob Fosse would have written if he were Blake Edwards, and Blake Edwards could, you can interchange the pieces a little bit and say that that they have this self-awareness that was striking in many ways. And I think that's taking away from 10. We've seen this story hundreds of times. And
afterwards we've seen it again from Blake Edwards.
Yeah. But, so it's a tired tale of the middle-aged man who starts pining over first
off,
hot younger women.
We have to talk about the thing that I found most disturbing about this movie. Mm-hmm. Is that I'm 6 years older than Dudley Moore is in this movie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he was supposed to be 42. He's 42.
Because it starts with his birthday. Yeah,
I'm older than that, and
I've never gone through
that,
this.
am I?
Yeah.
Because this movie feels more human somehow. Like so part of that is Dudley Moore here, and we were talking before we got hot about how this was supposed to be a role for George Segal, and they swapped in Dudley Moore at the last minute. I don't think it works with George, just because he's not affable enough to excuse his transgressions. We've seen it in other movies. I brought up Bloom in Love, and you said something too, which I'm
Fun with Dick and Jane.
Fun with Dick and Jane, right? And we like him for different reasons in these movies. We like him because he's a sharper edge. Dudley Moore in 10 needs to be likable, even as he's setting out on a quest to cheat on his girlfriend
Yeah.
who he does. You can tell he sincerely loves her, but he just can't help himself.
Yeah. Well, I have a theory about this because I've talked about, when we talked about Tiptoes, I talked about being a short dude. And my theory is the reason why Dudley Moore works so well in this role is because when you see him like sort of with the attractive women the couple of times, instead of going, oh, that lech, you go, oh, good for him. Because it's sort of like, you know, he famously dated Susan Anton in the 80s, and that blew people's mind that, you know, this 6 foot tall woman was dating this 5'2" tall British comedian. And I think there's that sense of that same dynamic with Bo Derek, is that she is so gorgeous that when you see them together, instead of going like, oh, that bastard, he's cheating on Judy Andrews, you go, oh my God, he's the luckiest asshole in the world.
Right. There is some of that awe. Like Bo Derek in 1979 is sort of otherworldly. Like there's
she's Uncanny Valley. She legitimately looks like she's CGI created.
You see this guy. He's in a what is an otherwise, well, I wouldn't say it's a healthy relationship. She's a solid, upstanding citizen, and he has a.
She's essentially Julie
telescope.
Andrews. She's playing herself, basically.
She's playing. Well, yeah. She doesn't have a whole lot to do. She gets to sing and complain about things. But
I think that. I think the scene where they talk about broads and like the term. I think that's actually like her really good scene in this movie. I feel like Blake wrote that for her and wanted her to have it.
Yeah. Everything else, she's like, you're the woman. Beyond this scene, you're the woman.
Yeah.
But she's perfectly upstanding and committed. And Dudley Moore has a telescope where he watches his neighbor across the way engage in rampant orgyism. And,
Don Calfa from Return of the Living Dead. For a second, I thought he was Terry Kaiser, but then I realized it was Don Calfa.
It would have been a fun connection if it was like Bernie's origin story.
Yeah.
You could see that sort of working together. But anyway, so Dudley Moore sees the Bo Derek character, immediately becomes obsessed with her, and she's on her way to the chapel to get married. And he winds up getting in a car accident because he's trying to follow her, and then chases her to the chapel where he is stung by a bee. And this is another Blake Edwards moment that's just like, it's not, I mean, it's not funny, it's goofy moment. You get Dudley Moore with a swollen nose from the bee sting, and there's limited value on return there. Where we talked about the Blake Edwardsing of the whole thing, and this was our best example for when we know that it's gone a little bit too much, is when he goes in to the dentist, and the dentist he
figures out that Bo Derek is the dentist's father, so he figures if I go to her dentist's father, I can find out where she is. And that's his plan. And it turns out when he goes to the dentist that he actually has a serious issue with his teeth.
Serious issues, yeah. So he's like, the dentist is like, oh no, just for you, we'll take care of this today. I'll clear my calendar. We'll fill all 6 teeth. And of course there's the easy dentist gag where he tries to drink coffee stupidly and can't. And it's just rolling all over. And it's not just once. He tries to do it multiple times. And it goes on, and we got the gag. Let's continue rolling with this. And then, but even as you're losing faith in the Blake Edwards of the movie, he brings it back to something truly inspired comedically. And he has a set piece where Dudley Moore, with his Novocaine mouth that is incapable of forming regular speech, is trying to business.
Well, she's calling him. And
she's calling him, he's calling her.
Yeah.
Whenever she gets a hold of him, he's talking like a lunatic with this garbled mouth and is trying to say who it is, and I'm here, it's me, and he wants to talk to her, and she calls the police, and the police don't believe him.
Who is this? Is this 2750817?
Yeah, it's good. Oh, God.
God. Right.
That's the thing. It's like the thing that's frustrating about Edwards is that for every sort of one that makes you roll your eyes, like the coffee one, for me, like the one that sort of redeemed it was in that same bit where he's drinking the brandy, and the brandy is dribbling out of his mouth. So he gets another cup to catch the dribbling,
Right.
and
To
then
catch the brandy, he has to have.
and he switches the glasses so he doesn't like.
The switching of the glasses was such a neat touch. It was like you had the joke,
Yeah.
which was a good joke. But then when he's rotating the glass to drink the stuff that's fallen, I'm like, that's why.
Yeah.
That's why you're Blake Edwards. That's why you're Dudley Moore. You make together this thing works so well. We talk about the comedic set pieces that he's establishing, but the movie is actually really sincere
Yeah.
and isn't funny much at all beyond these specific vignettes of comedy. And once we get into Dudley Moore grappling with who he thinks he is and who he wants to be, like he wants to be a good guy, but he's still propelled to pursue Bo Derek, and certain set of circumstances he winds up just absolutely blotto and basically wakes up in Mexico.
Yeah.
Where she happens to be honeymooning, and through another weird set of circumstances, he finds the courage in this man who decidedly lacks courage, and saves her husband from drowning as he's grilling the beach attendants about what kind of accidents happen on a surfboard, and like it just so happens he's seen him fall asleep on a surfboard and drift out to sea.
And we should point out that the husband is played by Flash Gordon.
Also relevant. And again, Dudley Moore has a nice comedic scene where he has to get across the sand, and it's a standard the sand is too hot, but he's overplaying it just enough that it's not over the top, it's not too much, and his genius idea is to get two towels and throw down one towel and then one towel across the sand, and he makes the attendant piggyback him to the water while he's wearing full sweatpants and sweatshirt.
What did you think about the Dee Wallace scene? That one's I wasn't sure how I felt about that.
I mean, I like Dee Wallace so much.
Yeah.
It's kind of heartbreaking, her scene for me, just because I want her to have a moment.
Yeah.
Right? Because her moments were rare, and she's so good.
Yeah.
And she's kind of reduced to she's
pathetic.
Used woman.
She's pathetic.
I mean, she's written as the parallel character to Dudley Moore, and there's a poignant line that she's talking to Brian Dennehy is a great bartender.
Yeah.
Like Brian Dennehy minus the later 80s edge that he had, he was constantly typecast in these sort of cranky, irascible characters, and this one he's just a soft, quiet human who tends bar at this Mexican resort, and I kind of love that.
Yeah.
So the conversation is between her and the Brian Dennehy character, and she's comparing herself I'm him except as a woman, and I'm trash, and he's off with Bo Derek.
Yeah.
They were having dinner together, and she's watching them longingly. She had tried to have a little tryst with the Dudley Moore.
I think that was it's a complicated scene, and I wasn't quite sure if it landed for me, but I really like the intent of it, where basically
the intent is good.
Where they have they try to have sex, but he can't because he's really drunk and
he's
got other issues. But instead of her going oh, he's just really drunk, he can't get it up, she recalls that her basically last relationship was a man who was impotent. And she blamed herself because after the relationship ended, he got married and has kids now. So she clearly believes that the problem was always with her. So now that he can't get it up, she's well, I'm I'm clearly the problem here, even though like you're watching this and like you're D. Wallace, like you're pre-Howling, pre-E.T. D. Wallace.
Yes.
Like you are not the issue. Trust us.
Yeah, I don't think it was 100% successful, but like you said, the intent was there, and the fact that he wrote that character with a measure of that recognition, that it lands better because you're reading it as Dudley Moore is Blake Edwards. Blake Edwards has the awareness to suggest that the woman who is even younger than what he's stating his main character is Ursat's self on screen, and she's washed up and she's a used human. She's not capable of being attractive to a man her own age. It's a real scene that, you know, so maybe it doesn't land entirely, but the intent is enough that you've noted that, and it's like, well, that's interesting for 1979. It's interesting for this particular movie, what this wants to be, and it's a side of the conversation that would have been in probably 19 out of 20 movies that's totally ignored in anything that deals with the male midlife crisis. You're not seeing that female perspective at all.
Yeah. Talking about the Blake Edwards-ness of it all is, I was wondering while I was watching it, and I didn't know about the George Segal thing, but like I was wondering if the original script he was a director instead of a songwriter, and they just made him a songwriter because Dudley Moore was famously a musician before he was an actor. But also that works for George Segal too, because George Segal was also a musician who also acted. To me, like, it was clearly that this role was written for Peter Sellers. It's very much like Peter, especially like the physical humor and stuff like that. Like, this was a case of like Edwards, you know, having worked on the Pink Panther movies. He clearly knew that Sellers was like his best working relationship, but he would never actually offer it to Peter Sellers because Sellers was such a monster that working him was so difficult that he would never want to work with him again until finally he decided to try and make another Pink Panther movie. And so that was definitely what I was wondering, was sort of like how much of like the song and songwriting thing works out really well, because then you get that great sequence where he performs the song for Wallace at the bar, and it's really beautiful. And I don't think you would have that if he was just a director. But that was one thing I was wondering watching it. It was like how much did Blake Edwards want this to know this was about Blake Edwards, and how much was he actually trying to hide that?
I don't think he tries to hide it much. I mean, there's not much hiding that when you're using just a creative stand-in and another particular. Okay. I mean, he's still working around the movie business too. Like, he's not.
But I think that adds it. Like the celebrity adds sort of an interesting angle to this, because this is not just like some schlub who is having like this. This is a guy who, when he goes places, people know who he is. And when he tells them his name,
and he's not washed up. Yeah. He's not like over the hill in his career. Yeah. Like, he's still. I mean, there's an element of that. There is that sort of like, to me, probably the cringiest sequence is the one where he's talking about like how the songs that he like a couple today when they're getting married. Like the romantic song they're going to get married to is "Why Don't We Do It in the Road" by the Beatles. And that seemed to be like Edward sort of like, oh, the kids these days and the music they like, it isn't as good as the music we like. Yeah, it's written to be a nostalgic thing for like the music of, 20 years ago, or the romantic music, and it does come off as like the James Bond line in Goldfinger, what the Beatles.
Who needs it?
My dear girl, there are some things that just aren't done. Such as drinking Dom Perignon 53 above a temperature of 38 degrees Fahrenheit. That's as bad as listening to the Beatles without earmuffs.
The other thing I wanted to mention was that, like, the one reason why I like the fact that Blake Edwards so often cast his wife, and I think I brought this up in Victor Victoria, is that he was probably the only director who worked with her who truly understood how sexy she could be. I think so many other people, they just saw her as Mary Poppins, whereas Blake Edwards was like saw his wife and saw that this is a really beautiful, attractive woman. And so there are some outfits she has on in this where I'm just like, wow.
She had a racier side that she wanted to let out. Otherwise, why would you continue to do this? And she had to be fed up with the Mary Poppinsing of her career.
Yeah.
Like, she couldn't do anything that wasn't wholesome and G-rated. And she's like, no, I'm pretty racy. Give me give me a chance to show my boobs.
Yeah, I came from I come from British music hall. I know how to tell a dirty joke.
And I do love that. I mean, Julie Andrews is great, but letting Julie Andrews do all of these different things is wonderful, and I'm glad she was given any opportunity. The one thing that I didn't talk about earlier was he's got a way of writing homosexual characters. Yeah. It's very 1980, 1979. Like, we're at a period here that uses a certain amount of language, and I think there's a tendency for anybody that hears that language to dismiss the role or the character or the screenplay as stereotypical or reductionist, and that's unfair to the way he writes these characters and the way he wants them depicted. I'm blanking on his name now.
Robert Webber.
Right. Also in SOB.
Yeah. He's probably
he's fantastic.
He's probably most famous as the ad exec in 12 Angry Men.
Mm-hmm. And I think they used the word faggy a couple times in reference to him, but used for themselves and
it's clear in that instance that it's sort of a case where, because he plays he's Dudley Moore's lyricist. And so this is a couple, like they're an actual couple who
they're a working couple, but they are definitely played as a squabbling married couple. Yeah. They've been together so long that they you said they finish each other's sentences, but that's where they are in their relationship. So it's very natural in the scene, and it's gotten to the point where I sort of like. Your little radar goes up when you hear it now. It's always like, oh, is that okay? Like, how okay is that? Am I supposed to tolerate this? And then you have to go through the steps of deciding intent and usage. And I mean, he's honest. Yeah. I mean, that to a fault at times, but the character that he writes is deeper than any character. I would say that character, in the limited time he gets, is actually a more deeply written character than our main character.
Well, the scene that sort of is sort of they're talking on the phone, and Weber basically, like, you see his boyfriend sort of like in the background of scenes and that, like, and basically like you more comments on it because all we see him do is like jog on the beach in swim trunks. And Moore's like, is that all he does? And Weber's like, well, that's all he needs to do. Like that is his job. But then he's talking to Moore on the telephone. It's clear that that they've had a fight, and his boyfriend has left, and the boyfriend has sent him a letter, telling him like, this is, I'll forgive you if you do this. And Weber's sort of like, I think I just have enough pride, enough like, worthless pride that I'm just not going to let him come back. And that's actually, I found that to be a very moving moment. Like, that just sort of this idea, like he knows that, he's getting older and that chances are he will not be able to find another relationship like this again. But it's still part of him is like, I'm too old to go through this shit again. I'm at the point where I just have to let go and maybe be alone for the rest of my life. Yeah,
that scene registered with me too, and it was moving, and I just thought it was worth mentioning.
Well, I don't like we should be very grateful that there are no Asian characters in 10.
Yeah. Yes, I didn't go into that, but yes. 100% agreed on that.
I guess we can. The Carrie treatment is the only time an Asian character appears in a Blake Edwards movie, and like he's the one who commits the abortion, who does the abortion that sets the plot in motion. But at least he's not like a complete Asian stereotype. So we don't have to have a scene of James Hong embarrassing himself for money.
Well, it's we go back to he loved a cheap gag sometimes, and man, did he. Yeah. What else we have to say about 10?
We haven't talked about Bo Derek very much beyond like sort of. Yeah.
No, I was going to say the iconic running scenes were duly deserved.
Yeah.
That's all I knew about the movie.
Yeah.
Really, I honestly don't know what I expected out of it. I just knew it starred Dudley Moore. To be honest, I didn't even know that Julie Andrews was in it until the credits rolled, because I had paid so little attention to it. I just knew that it was a movie I should have seen by now. Pure definition of this podcast.
Yeah.
So going through Bo Derek, we've all seen the iconic pictures. We've seen her run along the beach. She's not... They shielded her from doing a lot of acting. She just had to be Bo Derek, and I've seen other Bo Derek movies to know that's the right play.
Well, I find like the joke is that she wants to make love to Bolero, and that became so much a part of her brand that her and her husband John Derek ended up making a movie called Bolero.
Yeah,
and it's really bad, like almost heroically bad.
Yeah. I have seen that too, which is the like why this podcast exists is because I watch crap like that, but 10 sits on my shelf unwatched.
I will say, to my benefit, I still haven't seen Ghost Can't Do It, co-starring her and Donald Trump.
Yeah, I haven't gone that low either. No, I don't know if we'll ever get down the Cinema Shame ladder that far.
So our takeaway is C10, and you can probably skip the Dark Side of the Underneath.
Yeah, unless like we said, you're into that Jodorowsky situation, in which case definitely go give that a watch. Yeah. I will probably eventually watch it because it's there on the box set.
Or part of it.
Or at least part of it. I want to get a taste. You gotta dip a toe sometimes.
I had to stick through it till the end. You have the luxury of being able to hit stop.
Are you ready for your next assignment?
I am. I hope it's not Blu-ray O, because then you get to pick.
Yes, we already know. That's the one we know I can pick. Oh, you're back on digital.
Okay,
so
that's easy for me.
This is a long spin. I must have hit that one hard. Digital under the letter B.
B. Okay.
B.
So let me see. I got some options here. I've got Bachelor in Paradise, Bachelor Mother, Bad Business, Bathing Beauty, Battle Cry, Behave Yourself, Belle Star, Beyond Reanimator, Beyond Atlantis, Bikini Time Machine, Black Candles. I got a lot of choices.
Didn't you do Q once?
Yeah,
you had a Q?
Quicksand.
That's right. Well, I am on digital Q.
I've got 6 other options for that if you don't have any.
Oh, okay. Here we go. We have The Queen. Quick, Let's Get Married.
Do you have Quick Before It Melts? That's one I've always wanted to see, but I've never gotten my hands on.
No, not here. Yep, looks like it's technically Quick, Let's Get Married is the only true digital that I have. The Queen is just a rip from, because I put all my Warner Archive DVDs in a case and ripped them.
Rip counts.
Okay. Well, then I have 2 options.
Our theme song was written and recorded by Preacher Boy. Hear more from the godfather of alt blues at preacherboy.com. You can find us on Twitter at CinemaShame and on Instagram at CinemaShame Podcast. Cinema Shame lives on the web at cinemashame.wordpress.com. If you have a confession you'd like to make on Cinema Shame, email us at cinemashame@gmail.com or send us a message on Twitter. That's all for today's episode.
Had hit the hood of Sea Eastwood, that well-known meanie who like Fellini thought absurd. Soderbergh's claim that famous Harold Ramis was the greatest director in the history of cinema.
You have chosen wisely.